Welcome back, Ryan and Cars. Thank you very much for your viewership. Today's topic: childhood dream car. I played with Hot Wheels, and I played with Hot Wheels, and the coolest Hot Wheels I got. I think my uncle bought it for me for a birthday or something, or was it a birthday? A Christmas gift? I think maybe it was a Christmas gift. It was kind of cool because I always liked the freaky looking cars with the big motors and things like that, like the super hot rods. You know, they had the big silver, I don't know, engine and the pipes coming out of the hood. And I liked those because I liked Mad Max, the movie. Mad Max Road Warrior as a kid, like that whole fantasy bit there, and the cars really appealed to me. I didn't know anything about cars, but I remember, playing with those things, which is funny because as a grown up, I wasn't even not even interested in those kinds of cars. But the neatest Hot Wheels setup that I got, I think was for Christmas, and I can't remember who bought it for me, but it was a tractor trailer setup. It was in black and gold. It was a John Player special. Uh, Lotus Formula One car. So it had the tractor part, the semi truck, and then it had a car carrier thing, and this Formula One car, the Lotus Formula One car. And I remember seeing those on television. They're all black and gold. The whole thing was black and gold, and the car rode on the trailer, and the whole thing looked fancy. Like that was the first Hot Wheels thing that I got that wasn't just a Hot Wheels car. It was a Hot Wheels trailer and it was a Hot Wheels like semi truck, right? And I really liked putting that car up and down on that ramp, unloading it and loading it. I do remember that. And I also liked the Formula One car because it was completely different than all the other Hot Wheels cars that I had. Okay. Now, the up until that car, my favorite Hot Wheels car was the General Lee. The Dukes of Hazards, because it was on television, right? There was a lot of really good car shows when I was growing up in the 80s. There was Kit, the Knight Rider car. That's right. There was even Herbie. As a little kid, there was Herbie, the car with definite personality. But yeah, but the John Player Special Lotus car, I just really liked how it looked, and it wasn't until this is what happened. This is why my uncle, he came by and he goes, "Oh wow, that's a that's the Lotus team," and I'm like, I didn't know what any of that was, right? And I think there was Lotus on the side of the Formula One car and on the side with the whole John Player Special JPS and the black and the gold and swirly stuff, right? And I'm gonna turn all this on. There we go. I just liked the look of it. I liked playing with it. It all worked. Things flipped. It was made of metal. Like I just the whole thing. But my uncle came by and said, "Oh wow, hey, that's pretty cool. That's the Lotus Formula team, right?" And that whole setup, and just him noticing this because this guy was rough around the edges. The whole thing. He like there was no sophistication at all. And then I found out, Formula One is supreme racing and things like that throughout my life. And later on in life, because of that moment, because of that moment, and then playing with that toy, Lotus, the car maker Lotus, stuck in my head. We'll leave it at that, because it was later on. Then it was James Bond movies, and they had this cool looking car. It looked like a spaceship, right? And I didn't know what it was. And my dad liked James Bond movies, and he said, "That's a Lotus." Again, it was cemented. I didn't know what kind of Lotus. I didn't know anything about Lotus. Just I learned through James Bond movies that it's a British car. One of the best handling cars in the world, one of the fastest cars, kind of thing, right? And it was the Esprit. And then they showed a couple more in further James Bond movies. I think it was Diamonds Are Forever, and he took it to the ski resort, and he pulled up in a Lotus with snow on the ground. I was like, that's cool. Anyway, the Lotus Esprit became my childhood kind of like dream car. The last time I saw it in a movie was at not Pretty in Pink, but the Hooker movie with what's her face. But anyway, like he's going down Sunset Boulevard or whatever it's called, Hollywood Boulevard in LA there, in that silver Lotus Esprit, and then she jumps in and she knows exactly what the car is. She said, "Oh, this thing must handle like it's on rails." But as a kid too, like as a young guy starting to get to know cars, tuning became a thing. I started visiting real drivers with real racing kind of cars, right? And they were like Celicas that they had fixed up that they could go and take on a track, and they would race and competition and stuff. And I'd be visiting these guys' places, and we'd go see their cars in their garage. It's just car things you do with car people, right? And your friend says, "Hey, come with me. You're gonna go visit my buddy, and he's got a car." And you go into the garage, and then on the wall are these pictures of them putting in this engine, or stuff like that, putting the car together, and you'd see the story of this car on the wall, which was really cool to see. But we went to, he started, my buddy started tuning cars. It became a hobby of his. And we would start going to these places that he would buy from. He'd work out a deal for some, a seat or a steering wheel or struts, right? Or an exhaust system. So there was this other guy in Edmonton, and he owned Silverstone Motorsports, and he had. I didn't know it. We would go in there and we'd look around the shop and stuff or whatever. But he had this car under covers, right? And I always kind of wondered what kind of car it was. And he said, "Oh," I finally asked him one day. I said, "Hey, what kind of car is this?" Like, because it was all wedge shaped. You could see under the blanket, like, and you couldn't tell what kind of car it was. And he goes, "Oh, that's an Esprit." I was like, "Can we look at it?" Yeah, and that's what he did. He pulled the covers off of it, and I got to be up close to this Lotus Esprit car. First time in my life that I would see, I'd see one once in a while. You'd see one driving, but people always knocked them because it was British and they always broke down. And I never, and the car that I actually did see driving was his. To be honest with you, I'd seen it a couple of times parked places. I just didn't know it was his. And it was the dark red, not burgundy, but it was the dark red, and had a tan interior, I think. And just the look of the car, you know, had me sold on. The thing looked futuristic, right? And then the Countach came up. People started talking about the Countach. And I saw the Countach, and I was like, "Yeah, that's a cool car. It looks like a spaceship." And I actually ended up buying one of the posters and put it up on my wall. I also did that with Vectors. The Vector cars were amazing to look at, and I had a picture of a Vector on my wall because those cars they all look like spaceships, right? And now that brings me back to like when driving around with my parents as a little kid, childhood dream car, my childhood dream car. I always thought cars were like spaceships, and by the time I got older, we would definitely be in like flying cars, right? But I would just imagine I'd be sitting in the back seat in the middle, and the old '70s cars or whatever. They always had the emblem on the hood, and I was using that as the heads-up display. So I'd pretend I'm flying this spaceship that my dad's driving, and I was using you know, the hood ornament to shoot my lasers. And I loved it going through tunnels and stuff because Battlestar Galactica, they always had that launch. I don't know if anybody remembers that old TV show. Uh, they would launch of the feet of their battleship, or Battlestar ship, and all the lights would be going by, right? And so when we went, there was a few tunnels around in the city that I was living in, and every time we went through the tunnels, that's what I would think. I would think spaceship, we're launching, it's going, like we're gonna go do some battle, right? Um, so for me, cars were literally, like spaceships. So yeah, when I saw the Lotus Esprit up close and personal for the first time in my life in 1980, I don't know, nine, maybe not, yeah, 1989, 1988. It, there was nothing like it on the road for me. There was nothing like it on the road for me. Now, when I had my car magazine, sometimes I would see this black Lotus Esprit in the John Players Special Edition paint job parked out front. I had seen the car few times around the city, but I never saw who drove it. Now, I was working out of my buddy's office, and he sometimes gets, um, like high paying customers in there and stuff. There was another guy who owned a Ferrari, and so sometimes the odd time you'd see these really cool cars outside of his business, right, parked out front. And while I was doing my magazine, the car showed up, and it was parked out front, and I just said, "Hey, like, whose car is that?" And he goes, "Oh, that's Buddy's, one of the guys working there." I was like, it totally surprised me because I'm doing this car magazine, and everybody was excited about the models and stuff coming in and out and things like that, but nobody really talked to me about cars there except maybe my buddy, and he wasn't a real heavy into cars sort of thing. He likes cars and liked what I was doing, and he was actually part of the inspiration for the magazine and the idea and the thing behind it. But what I didn't know is that there's a Lotus collector in the office. His favorites were the Elans, and I went and talked with him, and I didn't know this guy liked cars. He did not look like it. He didn't act like it. But I went and talked to him about the car. I just went and sat in his office and said, "Hey, man, like that's like the coolest thing ever." I told him my Hot Wheels story of the John Player Special Formula Team, right? And we instantly bonded. He's like, "Yeah, I bought this car. Like it was like 15, 20 years ago. Um, I keep it in my garage and stuff. I take it. You got to run these cars." He says, "You gotta run them." So I take them out every once in a while. He says it's really hard to find parts because everything on this stupid car is handmade. And we went outside and we looked at the car, and he's like, "Look at these taillights." and there was like 15 different pieces on this taillight, and he's like, it's not, put together. Somebody, it was if you know anything about British sports cars, they were all put together by hand in literal glorified shed in the Midlands, just like Jeremy Clarkson says. Like, there is so much truth to that. And there was some guys, some guy in a trench coat or whatever you call it, smock, putting together the 15 different pieces for this taillight and fitting it on. The rubber gaskets, the little bits of plastic that all clip together and everything like that, and then screwing it in, with a screwdriver, right? And then we walked around the car. He's lifting up, the trunk, the hood. Then we sat in the car, and he's like, all of these switches, everything in here, all of these. He's like, all of this stuff is basically hand put together by hand. And he goes, and you know, it's getting old. I, you have to go in, you have to tighten things, you have to keep things greased. You're constantly working on the car. He wasn't complaining about it or anything like that, but that's when he said, you know what? Come to my place, and we'll have a talk, because I've got this isn't my dream car. He's saying it's one that I came across. I'm a fan of Lotus, and I could not pass this up, right? This John Player Special Series Lotus Esprit. Like, I could not. I came across it, and I could not pass it up. He goes, but like, I'm a fan of the Elan. He's like, I've got like 7 cars at my house, and he's like, you should come and have a look. And I did. And I drove over there, and this guy, it was out in the suburbs, and it was in a cul-de-sac, and he had cars all over his property. He had Lotuses on his lawn. He had Lotuses beside his house. He had, Elans all around his place. And he was at various stages of restoring these things, right? Some were just a shell. Some were just getting ready to be painted. And like, out of the woodwork, I never would have guessed this guy in a million years. And I got to see his, childhood car dream in progress. Absolutely in progress, right? And I always thought, one day, I sit around with my buddy, and we have said stuff like this, so what's your dream car, right? Or if somebody gave you, a Camaro, would you take it? Of course you would take it, right? But now the same amount of money, if you had the same amount of money as that Camaro, would you take the Camaro, or would you take the money? What would you buy? And they're like, well, what's available for that amount of money, right? Like, I'm not that hot on that Camaro, but for whatever it costs, 60, 70 grand, what can I get for, whatever it was at the time when the Camaro, for the new Camaro came out in the Transformers movie. I don't remember what they were at the time. It's the same thing with a Hellcat, or a Dodge Demon. I thought, before I knew anything about them, I just heard the word Dodge, and I said no. Like, I didn't know what they were, right? But if somebody gave me a Hellcat, I would have said no, not in a million years. Not It's probably junky, and you kill yourself in it, and it's just a headache. And I would much rather go take the money and buy something European. Maybe the new Supra, something like that, right? And after getting to know and understand those cars, I'd be like, if somebody gave me something like that, I'd be totally, yeah. I mean, really cool cars, right? 2021s, 22s, 23s. I really do. I've been watching videos on them, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? They're really cool cars. I still think they're way overpriced for what you're getting, but it's kind of a once in a generation car that will actually, people will talk about 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now. Just like I'm talking about, the Lotus Formula One car from 1970, you know. If I had, the 106,000 Canadian dollars to go and pick up that Hellcat that's sitting in the Dodge dealership where I get my oil serviced, that car would fit out here, first of all, in this redneck country. But that amount of money, like for a car, what would I go buy? That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. I would go buy an old I would go buy an old Lotus Esprit, completely restored, little bit modernized, to the point where I could pretty much drive it every day. I don't know, I used to get the magazines where, those old, the auction magazine. I don't know if it was Barrett Jackson or something, but just a dealer, where all the dealers go in and they just list all these, exotic cars that, you know, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever, right? And, Shelby Cobras, everything under the sun with some sort of price next to it. And you could literally dream shop for a car, right? You could find old Griffins, TVRs, things like that. And just like these, these one-off specialty fun cars, right? And, and I really do, you know, miss looking at that stuff. I really do miss magazines. Don't you? I don't get car magazines anymore. And I used to buy car magazines. I used to buy motorcycle magazines. Because now it's all on YouTube, right? Or videos or whatever. And there is something to be said about that. What's your dream car, right? What would you choose? Right now, like if you had the time, money, energy, like some people, their dream car is a certain car, but their dream is to build it themselves. Whether it's out of a box or to completely restore it and then drive it around, right? I know that, like, I've run into people where that is their thing. And then there's some people where, hey, if it becomes available, I'm pouncing, right? I'll just buy it. I don't want to do all the work, right? I just want a fully restored old something, Chevy Bel Air, or, you know what I'm talking about, right? Or I want, a muscle car that's been bored out and ready for track kind of thing. And I just want to drive it on slicks, or, I just want to drive it around town with the great big supercharged and thing rumbling and bumbling and burbling and, doing burnouts at lights and in parking lots and stuff, right? You know, some people, I'd like one of those, what are they, the old Supras in the movie, what was it called, Tokyo Drifting, can't remember the name of those. Need for Speed, no, it wasn't Need for Speed, it was Too Fast and Furious, right? Maybe you want some tricked out Japanese or European car, right? One of the cars that I saw, the most recent, in recent history, I'll say, one that really, 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 really caught my eye, that I thought was so forward thinking, and nobody noticed it. Everybody didn't like it. And it was that BMW i7. Was it i7? But that hybrid, and I think they were the first ones to put out the, hybrid supercar thing there. And I was like, that's a total daily driver. That would be cool. That was a really good looking car. I was at university and somebody had one and they driving by it. And I was like, whoa, what the heck is that? And I had nothing to do with cars at the time. I didn't know what was going on in the car world. And I saw some of the best cars in the world at my university. All the Chinese students, right? LFA, um, Hurricane. What's that other Lamborghini, the big one? with the fire that comes out the back. One of those. That BMW. There was just McLarens. Like some of the coolest cars come in. I'd be standing there waiting for the bus to go home, right? And these cars would come. I'd be like, whoa, new cars, new supercars look really super cool. Definite spaceships, right? Yeah. What was your dream car? Write it in the comments. Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe it's a truck. Maybe it's a semi truck. I've seen those things in down south, like in Mexico and stuff, where they, or no, in Thailand, and they put all the lights on them and things like that. And these things are totally decked out. Yeah, yeah. Like, what is your dream? What was your childhood dream car? Share it in the comments. That would be fun. Everybody, everybody has their own. Maybe it's a station wagon. I've always wanted a station wagon as a grown up. That's why I like hatchbacks. Never been able to buy a station wagon. All right, like, subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.